GoForThe2.com. This is my Week 7 recap of all the games that took place yesterday. Some great matchups that took place yesterday. Upsets, some teams falling out of the top 5, other teams moving in. And we're going to get into some thoughts and insights about how it might affect week number 8 and the rest of the college football season. We've been blessed with a great season so far, and it's only going to get better. So stay with us at GoForThe2.com. Let's just talk about both podcasts that I gave you during the week. Let's talk about the Stanford Cardinal and the Notre Dame game yesterday. Credit Stanford for punching Notre Dame in the mouth. They took a 7-3 early second quarter lead. They led at the half 10-3. That's the first time all season that Notre Dame was down, especially down at the half. In the prior 5 games, Notre Dame took a halftime lead into all of those games and then relied on their defense. All eyes were on Notre Dame. How would they respond in the second half? Would they fold? How would they respond to the adversity? And you have to credit head coach Brian Kelly and his staff for keeping the team within the game plan. They did gut out a 20-13 overtime victory over Stanford. Credit quarterback Tommy Rees for rescuing the Irish yet again. It's the third time this season that he has rescued the Irish. He did it against Purdue. He did it against Michigan, and he did it yesterday to bring the Irish to 6-0. Rees was 4 of 4 for 43 yards. He did throw the touchdown in overtime, and then that defense led by Mane Te'o and the defensive front 7 held Stanford. They shut them down in overtime, and they hung on for a 20-13 victory at home in overtime. That last play, if you would like to know, in my estimation, the right call was made. They stuffed Stephon Taylor, Notre Dame did, on back-to-back plays. Clearly, if you looked at the video, his momentum was stopped, and after the line judge did come in, he rolled off the pile into the end zone. I think the refs got it right, and Notre Dame picked up the victory to go to 6-0, and they're in the top 5 for the first time since 2002, I believe. So hats off to Brian Kelly and his staff for a dominating performance at home against Stanford. Now their tougher part of their schedule comes into play. They still have to play Oklahoma and USC, and they have a very good defense in BYU coming to South Bend next week. So I'm curious to see how Notre Dame responds. Tommy Rees, he's a cool customer, man. Let me tell you, the kid's got ice in his veins. It's the third time that he's done it. He seems to be comfortable coming off the bench. He shows no emotion. He just gets it done. And hats off to Tommy Rees and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish for picking up the victory. When you look at Everett Golson yesterday, he did show some of his inexperience. He did get sacked in the end zone, which led to Stanford's touchdown. And he's going to have to progress a little bit later. He's going to have to progress in the passing game and understanding pressure as these games become more and more important, and as the meat of Notre Dame's schedule starts to take place. Everett Golson will have to step up. Otherwise, keep an eye out. Tommy Rees could be called upon to rescue the Irish yet again. When you look at West Virginia and Texas Tech, I was calling for the upset in Lubbock. I got it, but I didn't think it would be such a dominating performance by Texas Tech. They picked up a 49-14 victory over Geno Smith in West Virginia. Credit Tommy Tuberville and his staff with a great game plan. Quarterback Seth Dagey answered the bell. He threw for 499 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, and you have to credit the Texas Tech Red Raider defense for what they did to Geno Smith in that offense. They forced Geno Smith to methodically work down the field, and when you look at Geno Smith's statistics, he only had 38 incompletions coming into the Red Raider game through 5 ball games. That's an average of 7 incompletions per game. Texas Tech forced Geno Smith. He was 29 of 55 for only 275 yards. He threw 26 incompletions yesterday alone. Prior to that, he only had thrown 38 in 5 games, 7 per game. So that's a very gutty effort by Texas Tech as they move to 5-1. And you have to credit the Red Raiders and their coaching staff on a good game plan. The back-to-back road games for West Virginia hurt them, along with that wind in the stadium. There was about a 20-mile-an-hour wind, and Geno Smith did look affected by that. So I'm sure that affected his performance as well, not seeing that type of wind in West Virginia. I'm curious to see how the Mountaineers respond. They do have Kansas State coming to town. K-State and Colin Klein with another gutty performance. They picked up a 27-21 victory in Ames, and head coach Bill Schneider has his team in the top 5 yet again. He did it back in 1998 when his quarterback was L. Roberson. Here we are 14 years later, and Bill Snyder and his team are in the top 5. So give credit where credit is due. He has done a great job at Kansas State, and I'm curious to see how that matchup takes place. We'll have a breakdown for that game later in the week. I want to talk about the SEC a little bit right now, and 3 teams in particular. Let's start with top-ranked Alabama. A very dominating performance, 42-10 over Missouri. There's a reason why Alabama's ranked number 1. It's for their business-like approach that they take week in and week out. All the credit goes to Nick Saban and his staff. He has his teams prepared every single week, and they take a business-like approach. They don't overlook anyone, and that's a key reason why they're sitting at 6-0. When you look at the Heisman talk, I think at this point, for me, you have to throw A.J. McCarron into the mix in terms of Heisman candidates. A.J. McCarron, all he does is win. He reminds me of former quarterback from 1993, Jay Barker. He's a true winner. He plays within the system, but he also is performing at a very high level. He's completed 89 of 132 passes for 67% of his passes. He's thrown for 12 touchdowns and no interceptions. A.J. McCarron does not turn the ball over, and that's a main reason why Alabama's tops in the country along with their stout defense. McCarron did hurt his knee against Missouri, and there's no word on his condition about his knee. He does face Tennessee this week. We expect him to be ready, and that's always a tough matchup when Alabama plays Tennessee. It's a rivalry game, so that's next week's matchup. But Alabama, clearly in my estimation, the top team in the SEC with a very dominating performance. When you look at Missouri, do you think that they got a little more than what they asked for? You wanted an SEC schedule. Well, this is the effects of playing Georgia, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, and Alabama in almost back-to-back weeks. It's easy to maybe match up with an SEC team in a bowl game or a regular season game, but it's a very difficult task to play an SEC schedule week in and week out, and you're seeing the effects of the Missouri Tigers as they drop another SEC game. They haven't won a conference game yet. So that's the effects of playing an SEC caliber schedule week in and week out. Let's talk about LSU and the Mad Hatter. A great performance by Les Miles and his staff. The ability to throw on first and second down and neutralize Jadeveon Clowney in that game was a true reason why Spencer Ware and Hill got going later in that ball game. Mettenberger, he threw enough to force the South Carolina defense to spread out, and that's what opened up the running game later in that contest. And you have to credit Les Miles for a very gutty performance. They picked up a 23-21 victory at home against South Carolina, and credit defensive coordinator John Chavis and his staff and those 2 defensive ends. We heard about Jadeveon Clowney all week. Well, I think Barkevius Mingo and Sam Montgomery might have something to say. They were in Connor Shaw's face all night, and behind the LSU crowd, they forced Connor Shaw and Lattimore into ineffectiveness yesterday, and that's why they got the victory 23 to 21 at home. So you have to credit not only Les Miles, but John Chavis for a great defensive game plan, and the players as well for stepping up big. And they're back in the hunt, LSU. They have the schedule now. Should they win out, they can make their case for the national title as well. But the road is still very heavy, and I want to see how they perform, especially next week on the road at Texas A&M. Texas A&M, they're 5-1. This is a renewed rivalry of the former Southwest Conference days. When you think about Texas A&M, former quarterback Bucky Richardson. When you think about LSU's quarterbacks back in the day, you got to think about Chad Loop, Jeff Wickersham, and all those guys. Rowan Davey. Herb Tyler, we're getting back into the Texas A&M LSU days back there, and those were great matchups, and the rivalries renewed yet again this year. So it's a clash in styles. When you look at LSU, they make no bones about it. They love to run the football, very physical offense and defensive lines. We know about LSU. Texas A&M has a very spread attack. They're led by head coach Kevin Sumlin. They won 59-57 over Louisiana Tech. They had a 27-0 lead early in that matchup. They had to hang on. It looked like Madden football. Guys were running all over the place. No tackling. It was a 7-on-7 basically for much of that game. And their quarterback, Johnny Manziel, also known as Johnny Football, he set an SEC total yards record for 576 yards. He threw for 395. He added 181 rushing, and it's a clash in styles, and we're going to have to see how that matchup takes place. You have a finesse offense versus a very physical defense, and I want to see how that matchup takes place next weekend in College Station. It should be an electric atmosphere as the rivalry is renewed. This is a border war, LSU and Texas. And also on top of that, Texas A&M is 5-1 on the year. Their only loss, when you think about it, was to Florida. They dropped a 20-17 victory at home to Will Muschamp and the Florida Gators early in the year. So that's a great matchup next week. I'm curious to see how that plays out. I want to talk about Mississippi State right now and head coach Dan Mullen. They're 6-0. They're 3-0 in the SEC West. They picked up a 41-31 victory over Tennessee. A very good team in Mississippi State. They're led by their quarterback, Tyler Russell. He was 23 of 37 for 291 yards and 2 touchdowns yesterday. They have a big bruising back. You remember last year, everybody talks about Vic Ballard. Well, Ladarius Perkins was a back that split time with Vic Ballard last year. He's a bruiser, and he picked up on 23 carries, 101 yards. He abused that Tennessee defense late in that game to pick up yards and keep the chains moving for the Miss State victory. But when you look at Mississippi State, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to tell all the Alabama fans, all the SEC fans, I'm going to tell anybody that will listen to me, Mississippi State matches up very well with top-ranked Alabama. They're not afraid of Alabama. Last year, they lost by 17 points in Starkville, but that game, most of the year last year, was a 10-point game for much of that game, and Trent Richardson added a touchdown late in that game for Alabama to win by 17. The game is this year in Tuscaloosa, but the difference between Mississippi State from last year to this year is a couple of reasons. Last year, or over the last couple of years, they split time with their quarterback situation. Dan Mullen flirted with both Tyler Russell and senior at the time last year, Chris Relf. He was more of a spread quarterback. He played within his limits. He was a better runner than he was a passer. Tyler Russell is a legitimate quarterback that can make throws down the field, and he can stretch defenses and open up defenses in order enough to open up the running game. So that's the difference of Miss State this year. They play a very physical style of defense. They were toe-to-toe with Alabama defensively. They shut A.J. McCarron and Trent Richardson down last year. That late touchdown made it deceiving, but Mississippi State is a very tough team. Not only that, but Alabama has to play Mississippi State October 27th, and that it is a home game, but that is the week before the LSU game. So they have to be very disciplined. Alabama, I mean, that could be a trap game potentially for the Crimson Tide because they do play LSU the following week. So that's a game that you have to mark on your schedule if you're an SEC fan. You want to see how the Bulldogs go into Tuscaloosa and match up with top-ranked Alabama the week before they play LSU. I'm going out on a limb and saying it right now. That is going to be a very tough game for Alabama. So mark that on your calendar, October 27th. So that's the SEC right now. South Carolina can still get back in the mix. Connor Shaw had a pretty erratic day. He was pressured all day, and Lattimore did look good inside the tackles. But still to date, if you're asking me about Marcus Lattimore, I still don't think he's 100% with that knee. You might see vintage Marcus Lattimore a little bit later in the year as he gets stronger and gets his strength under him. I want to talk about a couple of teams in right now in terms of the Pac-12. USC, I watched that game yesterday in USC. I think they're very overrated. They took a 24-7 lead at halftime, and they did not score the rest of the way. I think Lane Kiffin, in my estimation, has done less with more than any other coach in 1A. They're very undisciplined on both sides of the ball. They had 10 penalties yesterday. They look confused on both sides of the ball. And if it wasn't for recovering that fumble on their own 5-yard line late in that contest, Washington would have had a chance to actually maybe tie that ball game up if they would have went into the end zone and would have made it a 24-21 game late in the fourth quarter. So that game is a little deceiving. They did dominate for the first half, USC, but the rest of the way they were shut down. Matt Barkley only completed 3 of 10 passes in the second half. And, you know, Lane Kiffin's teams lately have been coming in non-focused, non-disciplined. And when people talk about one-loss teams getting back into the hunt, they talk about USC. I don't see it. I think they're very overrated, and I think that this performance yesterday on the road against Washington is indicative of a team that's very undisciplined and a little overrated, and I think the USC Trojans are overrated at this point. When you talk about the Pac-12, you talk about Oregon, you talk about USC, you have to talk about Oregon State and what head coach Mike Riley has done. A very gutty performance with a backup quarterback. Their quarterback, Sean Mannion, went down. He had a backup quarterback. They had a very dominating performance on the road in Provo against BYU. They picked up a 42-24 victory, and Mike Riley's in the top 10, and a much-deserved credit to the year that he's put in for his team. He knocked off UCLA. He knocked off a very good BYU team. They have a very good defense, and to put up 42 points on the road against BYU is a very gutty performance, and you have to keep an eye out for Oregon State the rest of the way. I'm just going to touch right now about Oklahoma and Texas. Oklahoma, dominating performance over the Longhorns. I called for Mac Brown. I said he was on the hot seat at the beginning of the year. The 4-0 start had everybody thinking Texas was on the way back from to prominence from 2006 and Vince Young. I don't see it. I think David Ash is a very overrated quarterback. I thought that as the defenses got more physical and better, Ash would sort of underperform. He has a tendency to throw balls into coverage, and I think that Texas is overrated. They're 4-2, but the last 2 games that they've dropped, they've been exploited defensively, and the performance against Oklahoma in a rivalry game like that to get abused by the Sooners is a very it's a telltale sign going forward. If you're Mac Brown and that coaching staff, you have to get things turned around quickly if you want to salvage your season. Okay, so I think Texas is a little bit overrated. When you look at Oklahoma, they did right the ship a little bit. They did have some defensive holes early in the season, at least with Texas. They did seem to get those straightened out. The heart of their schedule is coming up. They do play Notre Dame later in the year, but Mike Stoops and Bob Stoops together look like they have the defense back under wraps. Early in the season against UTEP, they gave up 199 yards rushing to UTEP. They got exploited by Colin Klein and Kansas State. It looks like they might have found some solutions to the run defense, and they stuffed stuffed Texas and stopped the Longhorns yesterday, and I'm curious to see how Oklahoma and Landry Jones respond the rest of the way. It's going to be a great week of college football. Some quick matchups I'll just talk to you about in terms of what's ahead of us. We have K-State versus West Virginia, LSU traveling to Texas A&M, Alabama, Tennessee on tap. We're going to have our podcast before Thursday. We'll have our predictions for this week up on YouTube and on our website Thursday morning. So check it out. Stay with us. We love college football. We love talking about it. And we think that it's a great year already. So stay with us at goforthe2.com.